Welcome to the Central Mind Podcast, and I'm your host, Tony DeVito. None of the information provided in this episode should be construed as legal or medical advice. We at the Central Mind Podcast, our guests, affiliates, or any of their affiliates are not liable for any actions taken or decisions made by you from the information provided in this podcast. Please advise an attorney for any legal advice and a medical professional for any medical advice. We have a more detailed disclaimer available to you under the description of this episode. Welcome back to the Central Mind Podcast. Today's episode covers a high-profile and complex case that has captivated the nation, the Daniel Penny case. This is a story about self-defense, mental health, and public safety. We'll explore what happened on that New York City subway, the legal proceedings, and what broader questions this case raises about our society's responses to mental health crisis and public safety. First, let's go over what we know about Daniel Penny and the events leading up to this case. Daniel Penny is a 24-year-old former Marine. On May 1, 2023, he was in a New York City subway train when he encountered Jordan Neely, a 30-year-old homeless man. Witnesses report that Neely was acting erratically, allegedly yelling and making threatening statements toward other passengers. This situation led Penny to step in, ultimately restraining Neely in a chokehold. Tragically, Neely later died from his injuries, sparking a wave of controversy and legal action. The heart of this case lies in several complex issues. One major question is, was this self-defense or did Daniel Penny cross the line into vigilantism? New York self-defense laws allow a person to use reasonable force and to protect themselves and others. But this force must be proportionate to the threat. Prosecutors argue that Penny's response was excessive, as Neely was unarmed and didn't physically harm anyone. Penny's defense, however, argues that he acted to protect himself and other passengers in what he perceived as a dangerous situation. Jordan Neely was reportedly well known to subway regulars and had a history of mental health challenges. The case sheds light on the increasing visibility of mental health crisis in public spaces. How should society respond when mental health intersects with public safety? Now let's talk about the legal side. Initially, Daniel Penny was charged with second-degree manslaughter. According to New York law, this charge applies to when someone recklessly causes the death of another person. Prosecutors argue that Penny acted recklessly by using a chokehold for an extended period, despite the risks. Penny's defense, however, claims he was acting in self-defense. The autopsy reports revealed that Neely died from compression of the neck, and the medical examiner ruled the death a homicide. This finding became a critical part of the prosecution's case, as it provided evidence that the chokehold was a direct cause of death. The Daniel Penny case sparked an intense reaction across the nation. On one hand, some people view Penny as a good Samaritan who stepped in to protect fellow passengers. On the other hand, critics argue that his response was excessive and he acted as a vigilante, taking the law into his own hands. Media coverage has highlighted the polarization in public opinion. Some news outlets emphasize the need for self-defense in dangerous situations, while others point to systemic issues, including the failure to provide mental health support for people like Jordan Neely. Social media has been particularly vocal, with hashtags like Justice for Neely trending shortly after his death. The political responses have also been divided, with some politicians praising Penny's actions and others condemning them. This case in many ways has become a lightning rod for broader societal debates. Let's step back and consider the bigger picture. The Daniel Penny case has brought attention to several key issues beyond the subway confrontation itself. One pressing issue is the mental health crisis that is increasingly visible in public spaces. When people with untreated mental health conditions are left to navigate crowded urban environments without adequate support, what are the potential outcomes? And should everyday citizens who are not equipped to deal with the mental health population be held liable when they feel they must take action to protect themselves or someone else against that individual? A report from the National Alliance on Mental Health Illness highlights that mental health resources in many major cities are underfunded, leaving individuals like Neely without access to regular treatment. Advocates argue that had Neely received more consistent support, this incident and others like it might have been prevented. There's also the question of self-defense laws and public perception. Self-defense is a right, but where do we draw the line between reasonable force and excessive force? This case has many people reflecting on what they would do in a similar situation and what legal protection should exist for both bystanders and the people being restrained. Now we're going to work our way through the trial itself. The trial of Daniel Penny, a former U.S. Marine Corps veteran, commenced with opening statements on November 1st, 2024. Penny faces charges of second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide for the death of Jordan Neely, a 30-year-old homeless man and former street performer. The incident occurred on May 1st, 2023, aboard a New York City subway train, where witnesses reported Neely was acting erratically and demanding money and threatening to kill people on the train. Penny intervened by placing Neely in a chokehold for over 3 minutes, leading to Neely's death. The trial is expected to last between 4 to 6 weeks, with Penny facing up to 15 years in prison if convicted of the manslaughter charge. We'll go ahead and begin with the opening statements of New York State's prosecuting attorney, the Assistant District Attorney, Daphne Urin, where she says, "He was aware of the risk of his actions would kill Mr. Neely, and he did it anyway. Jordan Neely took his last breaths on the dirty floor of an uptown F train," she told the jury. Neely entered the moderately crowded subway car at the 2nd Avenue stop and began making threats about hurting people, scaring many of the passengers, she continued. She pointed at Penny, and she told the jury, "This man took it upon himself to take down Jordan Neely, to neutralize him." 30 seconds later, the train arrived at the next station, and all the passengers left the train car, except 2 men who were helping Penny restrain Neely. The prosecutor said Penny hung on to Neely for 51 seconds after Neely's body went limp. By doing so, he pushed Mr. Neely to the point of no return, Urin said. He left Mr. Neely lying on the floor unconscious and didn't look back. Urin said Penny's actions were unnecessarily reckless because he continued to chokehold for 5 minutes and 53 seconds after the subway car was empty of passengers, a grasp that never changed, Urin called it. The defendant did not intend to kill him. His initial intent was even laudable, Urin said, but under the law, deadly physical force such as a chokehold is permitted only when it is absolutely necessary, and for only as long as is absolutely necessary. And here, the defendant went way too far. I believe the state is arguing that Daniel Penny may have been within his rights to subdue Mr. Neely, and that it may have been the right thing to do at that moment. But once the train had reached its next stop, and everybody else got off of the car, then Daniel Penny should have let Mr. Neely go. However, in the defense's opening statement, they wanted to make it clear that this case is about a young man who did it for others, what we would want someone to do for us, Knief said. It doesn't make him a hero, but it doesn't make him a killer. Penny was on the F train, headed to swim at a gym, when a seething, psychotic Jordan Neely storms on and announces his presence, Knief said in his opening statement. Neely whips his jacket over his head and slams it to the ground in such force that even those who don't see it hear it. The defense said things on the train escalated from concern to fear, as they sought to portray Neely as far scarier than a prosecutor described in her opening statement. Neely sets his sights on a bench of female passengers, Knief said. Danny sees a mother barricading her son behind a baby stroller in fear of Mr. Neely. Penny heard Neely say, "I will kill," the defense said, and said there was no opportunity for him to de-escalate or stop Neely from the harm he was threatening. What Danny does do is leap into action, Knief said, borrowing from a bit of martial arts training he received in the Marine Corps. Penny put Neely into a chokehold without intending to kill him, but the defense said to hold him until the police arrived. His conduct was consistent with someone who values human life, and that's why he was trying to protect it so fiercely, the defense attorney said. Knief insisted his client does not want to use any more force than is necessary, but Neely aggressively resisted while in Penny's grip. He said Penny thought Neely, who was unarmed, might have had a weapon as he waited for police. The evidence will show that this struggle did indeed last between 5 and 6 minutes, but Penny was not squeezing, Knief said. Instead, the defense suggested Neely's death may have been caused by a cardiac arrest, a genetic condition, or some other reason that was not asphyxiation. The defense said that the risk of Neely's death was not something Penny could have perceived or anticipated. Clearly, the defense is arguing that Penny used necessary force against Neely and utilize it for as long as necessary until police arrived, just in case Neely had a weapon on him. As for testimony in the case, there were a few witnesses that took the stand. A 38-year-old Brooklyn woman, who defense attorneys call their star witness, testified when Neely was ranting his tone was so believable that there was a moment when she thought she was going to die. She described this behavior as satanic. She testified, I assumed he was having some sort of mental breakdown, that his threats were very traumatic and very believable, and that everyone was frozen. I truly thought I was going to die. Speaking of Neely. When Penny's defense attorney Thomas Knief asked Shrunk if she remembered Neely threatening to kill, she said yes. And when Knief asked her if it appeared that Penny, who he referred to as Danny, was trying to harm Neely, she said no. If he had gotten up, who would have known what he would have done, Shrunk told the jury. Another passenger to testify was an 18-year-old high school student who spoke about the moment Penny placed Neely in a chokehold. You felt a sense of relief when you saw that? The defense asked. Yes, said subway rider Sanchez. Were you still scared? The defense asked. Yes, I was, she said. Were you afraid that Jordan Neely would get up and make good on his threats? The defense asked. No, she said. You didn't think he was holding him overly tightly, did you? They asked. Yes, she said. Another passenger, Johnny Grima, testified he tried to intervene after seeing Neely wasn't responding, and he told the court, I told him to roll him over on his side so he didn't choke, saying I tried to pour water on his forehead, but Daniel Penny said stop. He said stop. Between these testimonies and other affidavits, they have conflicting statements. These conflicting statements from passengers and witnesses have some saying that Neely was threatening and making people scared, and others say he was not threatening at all. Some said they heard Neely say he was going to kill someone, and others say that Neely did not say that at all. Unfortunately, no one has come forward with video of what occurred before Penny took Neely down in a chokehold. However, they have video of Penny holding Neely in a chokehold, which has been shown to the jurors. The video started about 3 minutes after the incident started and shows Penny already holding Neely in a chokehold, and Penny continued this chokehold for the next 3 minutes and 10 seconds of the video, which prosecutors believe then totaled 5 minutes and 53 seconds that the chokehold lasted. The jury was also able to witness the 51 seconds of the continued chokehold after Neely went limp. Therefore, Neely struggled for about 5 minutes or more before going limp, and for the next 51 seconds was still in a chokehold from Daniel Penny while Neely was unconscious. Body camera footage from the police was provided as evidence as well. When questioned on the stand, Officer Tejada confirmed that when they searched Neely's body, all they found was a muffin and no weapons. Tejada confirmed that Daniel Penny was cooperative and appeared that he did not have anything to hide. Penny informed the officer that he was the one who, quote-unquote, put him down, meaning Neely. The prosecution is arguing that the fact that Neely was not armed supports the fact that Neely was not a threat or a danger at the time of the incident. Apparently, the prosecution doesn't know that a man could certainly kill another person, or especially a baby, with his bare hands. No weapons are necessary to kill another human being. I think that has been proven given that Daniel Penny killed Jordan Neely without the use of a weapon. Therefore, the argument that Neely was not dangerous or threatening because he had no weapon holds no water, and just because he did not have one doesn't mean that everyone else knew that he did not have a weapon at the time of the incident. And again, Neely would not have needed a weapon to cause great bodily harm or death to the women he was threatening or the baby one of the passengers had. Neely's family attorney, Dante Mills, said this case is simple. Someone got on a train and was screaming, so someone else choked them to death. Those two things do not and will not balance. There is no justification. He continued, Jordan had the right to take up his own space. He was allowed to be on that train, even to scream. He did not touch anyone. He was not a visitor on that train in New York or in this country, Mills added. I disagree, because the people Neely was threatening to kill also had the right to feel safe and not fear for their lives, which without the actions of Daniel Penny, one or more of those passengers may have been killed or seriously injured. You have freedom of speech in space, but you don't have the freedom of speech to threaten violence or threaten to kill someone. That is a punishable crime. The fact that there was no law enforcement available at the time, and it would only take a matter of seconds for Neely to grab a passenger, possibly a small child, and kill him. Someone else needed to take action before that became a reality. People cannot go around threatening other people's lives and only expect someone to do something to stop them only after they have killed someone. Nobody asked Jordan Neely to threaten the lives of the ladies on that train and the small child as well. He did that on his own accord, and there are consequences for such actions, as there should be. If anyone thinks for a second that I would wait for a man who just threatened to kill my daughter to actually kill her before I reacted and put him down, well, that's just insane. Sometimes you have to take a person on their word. In this circumstance, it is too risky to not take Neely on his word and just wait and see whether or not he's all talk or serious about his threats. This is a 50-50 coin flip that could end in a small child's life. This is not worth the coin flip. Unfortunately, this is Jordan Neely's fault. Yes, he was on drugs. Yes, he had mental illness issues. But are we always going to blame someone else for a person's actions? Can no one take responsibility for their own actions anymore? Sure, we can blame the state of New York, but nobody from the state of New York was standing on that train next to Neely to stop him and control him if he decided to kill a passenger on that train. Instead, Daniel Penny had to make that hard decision in the moment himself, and he decided to choose the innocent lives of the women and child aboard that train instead of the man threatening them. Protesters outside of the courthouse, people on social media, and in the courtroom may want you to believe that this is a racial incident about a white man killing a black person, but it isn't. It is simply a man making the decision to act when no one else would against a man who was threatening the innocent lives of passengers, including a small child, aboard that train. This is nothing more than a man making life-threatening statements, and whether he was serious about it or not. That gamble ended in his life. I feel sorry for Jordan Neely and his circumstances that led up to this moment. It is very unfortunate that he never really had a peaceful life. Society abandoned him. Something should be done to assist people like Neely to not only safeguard them, but also the people in society who are not equipped to handle them. Though, it would have been even more tragic if Jordan Neely killed a woman and a child on that train and nobody did anything to stop it before it happened. If Daniel Penny is found guilty and sentenced to 15 years in jail for manslaughter, then the message this will send to everyone else in our country is that you are not allowed to defend a woman and her child until they are already attacked and possibly killed. Do not stand up for yourself. Do not stand up for your neighbor. The only victims are the ones going around threatening others. People have the right to threaten you, and you have the right to take it until your child is killed or you're stabbed or shot or dying. The system protects those who commit crimes and threaten others and then re-victimizes the victims in court for taking action to protect themselves and others against that perpetrator. This is our system now. Re-victimize the victim and protect the criminals. If the state of New York finds Danny Penny guilty, then our justice system is sending you the message that you are no longer safe and you cannot do anything about it. And the system will not protect you, but instead protect those who hurt you. However, if it turns out that Neely did die of asphyxiation that the state claims he did, and not from a heart attack from all the drugs he was on, like the defense claims, then it means that Penny held for 51 seconds too long, and that could be interpreted as excessive force, and technically, once Neely went limp, Penny should have let go. Although this is hard to determine or do if you are in Penny's shoes in the moment, and adrenaline is high and you're afraid that if you let go, that Neely will attack you or others. So potentially those 51 seconds were to ensure that Neely was truly out and not faking it in an attempt to have Penny let go so that he could attack Penny in return. These are things that have to be considered in a circumstance such as this. In the Marine Corps, they teach you to perform a blood choke, which is meant to knock a person out, but not kill that person. If done right, it should render the person unconscious by stopping the flow of blood to the brain, essentially cutting off oxygen to the brain, and the person passing out. However, the person should be able to continue breathing and the heart should still remain beating, but the person will be unconscious and theoretically alive and well once the choke is released. Assuming that the blood choke was not properly engaged until that moment Neely passed out, it means that Penny had cut off the blood flow of oxygen to the brain for 51 seconds. A person can live without oxygen to their brain for 3 to 6 minutes. Therefore, 51 seconds would not usually be considered enough to kill a person with a blood choke, unless they stopped breathing in the process and never regained breath. The police never did mouth-to-mouth when they arrived on the scene, and they did not have the proper rebreather mask to give life-saving breaths, and the officers were concerned given there is a risk of catching a disease like hepatitis from mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The officers were not required by law to provide mouth-to-mouth without the proper protective gear, and neither are they required to carry it on their person by New York law. I think it is also important to add that it is possible that Penny did not actually apply a blood choke, but instead applied an air choke. An air choke instead puts pressure on the trachea and sometimes the larynx. And this pressure allows the breath, the air, to stop flowing in the person that's being choked. And it takes about 60 seconds before the person passes out, if it's done correctly. However, the dangers of the air choke is that you could crush a person's trachea and it could kill them. And for that reason, it's better to do a blood choke than an air choke. However, the two of those things are sometimes easily confused by the person who is applying them, and sometimes are done incorrectly, thinking they're doing one choke while they're actually performing the other. Daniel Penny case is challenging because it sits at the intersection of personal safety, mental health, and legal responsibility. Regardless of the outcome in court, this case has sparked a vital conversation on how we handle mental health, our right to self-defense, and the expectations we place on public figures and ordinary citizens alike to act appropriately in moments of crisis. I would like to hear your thoughts. Do you think Penny's actions were justified, or did he go too far? Should we be doing more to support mental health services in our cities to prevent situations like this from happening in the future? Leave a comment or reach out on social media. I'd love to know what you think. We will continue to have updates on this case as time goes on and the case progresses in court, so make sure you keep an eye out for future episodes, and thanks for tuning in. Special thanks to sources that have extensively covered this case, including the New York Times, ABC News, and the National Alliance on Mental Health, for their insight into the legal, social, and mental health angles of this story. Be sure to hit that follow or subscribe button to continue following us and listening to our podcasts. My name's Tony DeVito, and we'll see you next time.